Ooh, it's October now, and it's time for ghouls, goblins, and even skeletons. I figured in honor of this scary time, it was time to delve into the realm of Hearthstone's creepiest cards and the newly formed Undead tribe. Undead minions are all about dying and coming back to life, and if anyone knows about disappearing for a while and coming back all of a sudden, it's me. Number 10. Restless Mummy. A card that probably doesn't look too impressive to modern Hearthstone audiences, Restless Mummy was an absolute staple at the time of its release, and everyone who played during that time probably gets flashbacks upon hearing, "No tomb can hold me!" In Saviors of All Doom, Hearthstone was not that far removed from Flanking Strike being considered an elite, efficient card. Now, Restless Mummy came to the table as two immediately impactful minions, and it could be tutored out by Town Crier. Did your opponent have one larger minion? Well, if it has less than 6 health, it's about to be put in the dirt. Does your opponent have a couple of smaller minions? Well, they're about to see their ancestors. Nowadays, 4 mana gets you 3 damage and healing, or taunt and divine shield, or destroys the opposing hero, and no one really cares. But back then, when you could play Dr. Boom Mad Genius for 7 mana and people made videos like this?
I think the card is terrible to play against. It's so frustrating. It feels like a boss fight where you just against all odds, where it doesn't make sense because your opponent is doing things that just seem unfair and overwhelming. Not only are they generating infinite resources, but they're answering your board with ease because all of their cards suddenly have rush.
Getting to take out your opponent's Anubisath Defender or gobble up their Murloc War Leader was a big deal. Extremely efficient and extremely annoying, Restless Mummy is number 10 on this list of top 10 undead minions. Number 9. Chillfallen Baron. Released alongside Death Knight, Chillfallen Baron has been a staple of the class ever since. In a class that has had difficulties with draw until people discovered how strong Acolyte of Death could be with token strategies, Chillfallen Baron was an anchor of card draw for the class. Also, with Death Knight's defining feature being the rune deck building restriction, Chillfallen Baron's defining feature is its lack of a rune. Typically, Death Knights need to make some sacrifices to build their decks. You can't put Threads of Despair or Ma and Pa in the same deck as Grave Strength. And with Frost Rune taking the lion's share of Death Knight's draw cards with cards like Defrost or Frozen Over, it can sometimes be difficult to draw cards in other runes. From aggressive strategies to more control-oriented ones, Chillfallen Baron is just a solid option. The usual comparison for draw cards is Arcane Intellect, a 3-mana spell which draws 2 cards. Chillfallen Baron is similar that it will draw 2 cards eventually, albeit one of them is on a death rattle, but you get a 2/2 body on board, which is useful for Death Knight considering it needs minions to die to generate corpses, plus it can be used with Undead synergies or even used with Death Rattle synergies. Speaking of Death Rattles, number 8, Mad Scientist. Released in Curse of Naxxramas, Hearthstone's first ever adventure, this card is just over 10 years old. Most cards in the adventure were, underwhelming, but a couple were standouts. Mad Scientist, having an incredibly strong run, was an example of one of these high achievers. A 2-mana 2/2 was just about as big as River Crocolisk, and a respectable stat line for the time. By sacrificing 1 health, you got the death rattle of a free cast of a secret from your deck. While a little underwhelming for Paladin with its 1-mana secrets, Hunter and Mage were much more appealing targets. Notably, Mage could get a free Ice Block, one of the strongest cards of all time, for hardly any trouble at all. After some down years, this card eventually became a key role player of what was once the scourge of the Wild format, Secret Mage. Using years of secret synergies, Secret Mage could rip through their decks, disrupt with defensive secrets, and develop impressive stats on board. Crucial to this strategy was making sure secrets were in play without having to pay full price, and that's exactly what Mad Scientist is all about. Secret Mage has fallen off in recent times, with Wild now being full of new, even more diabolical strategies, so Mad Scientist is not as high as it would have been a few years ago, but for now, it gets to chill here at number 8. Number 7, Marrowgar. Triple rune cards. Back before everything was Rainbow Death Knight support, triple rune cards required you to play all of the same color of rune, whether that be green, blue, or red, to get some powerful effect like Lady Deathwhisper or Alexandros Mograine. And while many of these were strong and quite a few were undead, it is one of Death Knight's original cards that takes the number 7 spot on this list. Back before there was anything to spend corpses on, Death Knights, especially green Death Knights who would aggressively swarm the board, would end games with a full piggy bank of corpses doing them no good. But by opting into triple green runes, your problems could be no more by dumping absolutely all of your corpses into a giant Lord Marar to dare your opponent to have one last board clear or lose. Being free in the core set and Death Knight being an exciting new class, this card saw a lot of play and was able to be part of a pretty simple-minded strategy that could grab some easy ladder ranks. And if you know me, you know I like when the deck is simple and calm. My brain was born without wrinkles, so this stuff is hard. Number 6. Hollow Hound. Dual class cards were originally released as a mechanic in Scholomance Academy and have been occasionally popping up ever since, usually in mini-sets. One of those mini-sets was Audiopocalypse, and one of those dual class cards was Hollow Hound. While being an incredibly powerful card in its current state, it shockingly had 6 health in its original form. While the current card is strong, it can be criticized for not having a ton of staying power unless it gets heavily buffed. But at 6 health, it could clear 3 Lights champions no problem, heal you for 9, and still not die to a 1 damage hero power ping. Still, the card is very strong outside of its health, providing phenomenal healing for the typically unstable health totals of hunters, while being a runeless healing and removal card for Death Knight. This card made a massive impact on the meta upon release. First of all, Prince Renathal was running around at that time, which means big healing cards were better than ever, since you could bank even more health than you could normally. Second of all, this card pairs phenomenally well with any kind of buff like Hope of Quel'Thalas, Bunch of Bananas, or most devastating of all, always a bigger Yormonger. Yormonger was so devastating because it used to be 1 mana and therefore easier to play and snaggable off of Trinket Tracker, but also the effect would apply to each minion damaged by Hollow Hound. This meant accidentally leaving a few 1 health minions on the board could spell 15 healing for your opponent, 12 damage to your face, and that's without any other buffs. Most dual class cards are good in one class or the other. Usually the classes are so different that any effect that would make the card good in both gets quickly nerfed to irrelevance. This is not the case with Hound. Death Knight, while not having access to Yormonger, has a host of use cases for Hollow Hound, including buffing it up with cards like Lesser Spinal Spellstone and Amateur Puppeteer for stabilization and board clears. For the dual threat ability of this dual class card, Hollow Hound takes number 6 on top 10 undead minions. Number 5. Sylvanas / Reska? I'm putting both Sylvanas and Reska, the pit boss, on this list, since they have similar effects, and Sylvanas was a staple card of early Hearthstone, but Reska is really the boss. Pit. Early on, when card pools were thinner and when N'Zoth was released as well, Sylvanas was an excellent choice for a 6-drop that could be a pest for opponents trying to develop big minions. But Reska is like, so good. Sure, you have to have at least 1 Frost rune and 1 Unholy rune. As an aside, I call them blue, green, and red instead of those weird dumb names personally, but for this video I will try to be official. But Rainbow Death Knight with red, blue, and green runes is one of the most popular variants, and Reska is a strong part of that. Because it counts both yours and your opponent's minions, this card gets to be 0 mana very quickly. And since even just a 0 mana 6 attack rush minion is something that would make 2014 Hearthstone players blush, slapping Sylvanas onto it would make their noses start bleeding. I think this card was originally supposed to just be a great combo with Death Knight's Excavate Treasure, the Azurite Rat, but people have realized that you can just play this in regular Death Knight decks no problem. For great removal and board control, Reska takes the number 5 spot on this list. Number 4. Spirit of the Shark and Spectral Pillager. Another double entry, and if you're looking at the current version of Spectral Pillager, you're probably wondering how it's so high on the list. Well, dear viewer, I invite you to look at the pre-nerf version of the card.
Zan, get your boy, dog.
What's going on? Hey, what's good, dog?
Get your child.
Yes, for 5 mana, Spectral Pillager would deal damage equal to the amount of cards you had played that turn. Now, of course, with it being used in the wild format, you aren't really going to be paying full price for anything, especially not in Rogue. With Scab's Cutter Butter, Preparation, Counterfeit Coin combined with everyone's favorite Shadow Step, you can play heaps of cards all in one turn, cheat out a bunch of mana, and then play Spectral Pillager with Spirit of the Shark, and blow up your opponent's face with 50 damage before turn 7. I wasn't sure which of these two to put in this spot since they were partners in crime until Spectral Pillager tore both ACLs, but with Spirit of the Shark allowing further shenanigans and the recent development of an Alex Straza rogue deck, I might have to give the shout to the Shark. Number 3, Anubricon. These top 3 were very difficult to make a decision about. Anubricon, in all its iterations, was a very powerful card and deserves to be high up here, and you could make a strong argument it should be 2 or 1, but for now I have it here. What made it so strong? Where do I even start? Its original effect gained 8 armor and made it so all minions this turn cost armor instead of mana. And like a lot of cards that fundamentally change part of the game, this was completely overpowered since armor is a lot easier to get compared to mana. This is especially true when there are minions that you can play for armor that then give you more armor. Underking, for instance, would cost 7 mana of the 8 you just gained and provide you with 12. Anubricon was getting played in the non-Reno decks back before Reno checked what was in your deck before the game and not during, and then especially once cards like Eonar started coming out and it could let you refresh all of your mana crystals to keep the crazy turns going, Anubricon was just getting a little out of hand. Today, Anubricon does not see much play in Wild, so maybe some of the nerfs were enough, but during its time at full power, it was a massive problem, and that is why it is at the number 3 spot. Compared to other card games, there's not actually a lot you can do in Hearthstone to prevent your opponent from doing something totally. Maybe you could play a secret like Counterspell or Objection, but that might just cancel out one of your opponent's cards, or if your opponent has a cheap spell or minion, they can just play that first in order to get rid of your secret. There are cards like Cult Neophyte, which can increase the cost of your opponent's spells for a turn, but only increases the cost by 1, meaning if they really wanted to, they could probably pay a little bit more mana for whatever spell they wanted to play. Compare this to something like the Pokemon trading card game, where a card like Seismitoad EX or Dragonite EX can completely stop you from playing any item cards at all. Or maybe compare it to Yu-Gi-Oh, where your opponent can put up a bunch of negate effects that totally block you out from whatever you were trying to do. The only real card like those in Hearthstone is Loab. While 5 mana is a bit expensive, a 5/5 body is pretty reasonably costed, and the effect really can lock your opponent out of a lot of strategies. There is no but no more than 10 or anything on this card, so if your card costs 6 mana or above, you're pretty much out of luck. Unless you're like Druid. Or I guess Warrior now, since you can have more than 10 mana, but most of the time you're out of luck. There are not many 10-year-old cards that can say they have been competitively viable during Hearthstone's whole history, but Loab is one of them. Shockingly, this card has never been nerfed, and its only change in its history was being assigned the Undead tag once that tribe was released, qualifying it for this list. For a unique effect in a game that generally allows both players to fight fair, Loab takes the number 2 spot on the countdown. Number 1. Flesh Giant. With an impressive nerf history of being nerfed from 8 mana to 9 mana and then from 9 mana to 10 mana 2 weeks later, Flesh Giant was a menace on Standard, but particularly Wild Hearthstone. With Wild already having access to a plethora of self-damage effects, Flesh Giants were getting slammed down for cheap, much like me at Applebee's when they have those $1 margaritas. As I mentioned before, dual class cards are usually only good in one class, and this is a prime example of a card that maybe could have seen success in Priest, but was such a power outlier in Warlock that they had to kneecap it a little. Even now, the card is strong, as you can see from this list that just got rank 1 Legend a few days ago. Prior to the release of the Demon Seed, the card was pretty solid in zoo-based Dark Glare strategies, but it got put over the top when self-damage got such an insane game-ending tool. Unlike Spirit of the Shark or Anubricon or many of the other entries on this list, this card isn't that complicated. It doesn't enable some 1 million IQ combo or totally warp the game. It's just really easy to summon, and an 8/8 is a super threatening body that swings for over a quarter of your health each turn. If you're watching this premiere live, I'm actually live on Twitch right now at twitch.tv/Mr. Chundo. There's a link in the description. Also in the description is a link to the Chun Discord, the largest Chundo community that I'm aware of. Also is my Twitter down there, if you'd like to give that a follow, please. Also, if you could like and subscribe to the video, since we're pretty close on 10K here, so thank you.